Hi everyone, welcome to this Power Maths webinar. It's 3:30, so we're ready to go. I've got Tony, Stanley and Josh Lurie here from the Power Maths author team. And I think I will just pause for just a few seconds just to make sure everybody's got a chance to join. We did have just on the cusp of 500 people sign up, which is fantastic, and I hope we get as close to that as we can for this afternoon. So just to mention, you should be able to see that you've got a Q&A box where you can ask us questions, and you've got a chat box as well. If you use the chat box, then everybody else in the session will be able to see that, which is all right. If you've actually got any questions that you want us to answer, it's best to put those in the Q&A, okay? Right, so I think we will get going. I haven't put up an agenda slide today because it's really simple. There are going to be 3 parts to this webinar. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes first pointing out some resources and some guidance that will be relevant to today's topic. And then for the bulk of this session, it's going to be over to Tony Stanley, who is our Power Maths series editor and author, and he's going to give us his tips on using Power Maths. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A with Josh Lurie, who's a lead author for Power Maths, and he's going to answer the questions that you've asked already when you signed up for the session. So we've got lots of those to go through. So that's going to be our 3-part session. I'm going to share my screen now to get going. Remember to share the right screen. So hopefully you're looking at my page on the Pearson website. So we've added quite a bit of guidance recently in the form of blogs, and in fact quite a high proportion of the questions that you have been asking when you signed up are directly related to these blogs that we've been adding. So I thought that'd be quite a good place to start today. So I'm on the main Power Maths page on the Pearson Schools and Colleges site. Notice over here we've got our 2021-22 support tab. Okay, so this is where we're compiling all the latest information and support for using Power Maths. So if we scroll past this upcoming webinar, which obviously you know about, so scrolling down, this is look at our latest support and advice section here. Okay. So blogs, there have been, I open up the blogs section there have been some questions that you've asked about catering for children that need extra challenge. So this first blog has lots of ideas for depth and challenge with Power Maths. And we've had lots of questions. Lots of people have asked about using Power Maths when you've got children in your class that are significantly behind. So this second blog is the place to go for guidance around that issue. So definitely have a look at that. Then underneath that, we've got a blog on allocating resources to pupil logins with Power Maths. And then a blog on assessment. So that one's about, it summarizes average scores from the progress tests using data from the online markbook. So that's a termly thing to sort of update everybody on scores in the progress tests. And now this last one, quite a lot of you have asked about using Power Maths in Key Stage 1. So children being able to work independently, using the practice books, reading level, that kind of thing. So this blog explains that you don't have to have 30 children all using the practice books independently in year 1. You can do it in groups, you can build up to that over the course of Key Stage 1. So this blog talks about how to use the materials flexibly in Key Stage 1. And you know, based on the questions, I'm sure that a lot of you haven't seen that already will find that really useful. And you can see it's a short read. Then below the blogs, we've got some quick videos, component walkthroughs. And these are just very short videos about different parts of Power Maths, which will be particularly useful if you're just getting up and running with Power Maths. We're calling these power-ups for teachers, and we're adding these one by one, so there'll be more added to that. And then this Power Maths webinars lockdown. Take a look at that. I should say, actually, so this webinar is being recorded, as you might have noticed, and this webinar will appear here in due course, so you can flag it there to anybody who's missing it today. There have been quite a few questions about mixed age teaching, and so I would point out that webinar here. So that's a previous webinar that we've recorded. I would highly recommend watching that because it really goes into depth on the topic of mixed age teaching with Power Maths. So that's the place to go. And because the reception materials for Power Maths naturally are different in many respects to the year 1 to 6 materials, if you want a walkthrough of the Power Maths reception materials, watch this reception webinar. And there's a very short update which just tells you about what's new for 21 to 22. So that's for reception. And carrying on this page then, so underneath all of those blogs and videos, we've got this advice section here. And there's an FAQ, the big FAQ section here for Power Maths users. I wanted to flag that to you. Have a look at this, because again, many of the questions that you've asked will actually be picked up on that page. So I'm not going to go through it now, but you can find out about, for instance, using prerequisite lessons and other materials for pre-teaching, and using prerequisite lessons for addressing gaps in learning, following a recovery curriculum with Power Maths, improving children's fluency, there are ideas for that, and matching for the ready to progress criteria and the special ebooks that we've got for that, and many other things as well. So I just want to flag that this is a page where we've collected all that information. So hopefully you can check that out on the website. We'll keep adding to that page. And very briefly, there are a couple of ways that we keep in touch with our Power Maths users, which it might be worth mentioning. So monthly emails that we send out with the latest developments. You can sign up for these monthly emails, and actually I'll put, as soon as I finish talking, I'll put a link in the chat just so you can see that sign up. And latest news posts on ActiveLearn. So if I go back up, let's find my ActiveLearn. So let's see, I've got to sort of move my Zoom panel a little bit to find my ActiveLearn tab. So when you're in ActiveLearn, the bell icon here, which has the latest news, if you click on that, for these latest news stories. So I don't know if you've noticed that before, but look out for announcements that we make there on ActiveLearn. And finally, there's a Facebook group called Power Maths, which helps you connect with each other. And I know that loads of teachers find that really valuable. So one last thing before I hand over to Tony. If you're starting your journey with Power Maths, would really recommend taking PD as a school. But if you're further down the journey, we've started running online PD sessions for individual teachers who are new to Power Maths. So if that is of interest to your school, look out for, in fact, if you look down in the latest news, there's one in February, but look out for information about those on our latest news feed. Okay, I think that's about it from me. So over to you, Tony, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Just great. Hopefully everybody can hear me and can't see anybody, but nice for everybody to join us. As Simon said, my name's Tony Stanley. I'm one of the series editors and authors on Power Maths. There's quite a large author team, which I'll talk about very shortly. And the purpose of this presentation is really to look at the using Power Maths in the context of learning loss, okay, and using it flexibly. I've worked with 3 schools already in January around Power Maths, and some of those schools, for example, got it at the start of the previous year, and then halfway through the year there was the lockdown started, and so they weren't able to embed it, etc., etc. So I know that some schools have been on an interesting journey with Power Maths, and I'm hoping to be able to, through this presentation, to give you a sense of how, as authors and a series editor, we saw Power Maths to be used flexibly, and then we're going to present that in this context of learning loss today. So I'm assuming that majority of people on this call today are already users of Power Maths. If you're not, it doesn't matter. You've come to find out a bit more. That's absolutely fine, and hopefully you will gain a bit of insight into it today. And yeah, and then Josh, my colleague Josh, who was with me on the entire journey, will be able to pick up any. I know lots of you set questions in. We'll be able to answer some questions towards the end. So. My presentation is made up of 3 parts, really. I just want to talk extremely briefly about the underpinning mastery principles. Really, lots of you probably involved in maths hub work groups, etc. And so just want to remind you of those and the reasons why we did that. And then number 2 is this idea of I want to cover each section in brief detail and why the theory behind it, and also what schools who are getting the most out of Power Maths, how they're using it, because I know some of you might not have been on the PD training or might not have had the PD training, so I hope you'll be able to get into our heads a tiny bit with that. And then finally some implementation advice if there's bits of it that you're struggling to implement or want some advice and guidance on, then the final section will be for you. Although I think all of the sections will be really useful. I should say that writing a textbook and series to meet the needs of 16,000 primary schools was a challenge, and it still continues to be a challenge as we work with schools in terms of how to get the best out of Power Maths. So yeah, so we'll move on to section 1, which is these underpinning mastery principles. Now, I'm sure you've seen this from the NCTM. Okay, this came out back in 2016, I believe, and there was 4 things that were defined in this paper. Firstly, a mastery approach. Okay, so these are the underpinning mastery principles within Power Maths, that idea of a mastery approach, and that ultimately is a belief that every child can succeed in mathematics. Okay, so it's vital that if you're using Power Maths, that you believe that every child can succeed in mathematics. Then you've got this idea of a mastery curriculum, and the small step approach, etc. And the Power Maths one has been written to fit in with the White Rose math scheme. Okay, although you don't have to be following White Rose maths to use it, but it has been written to go alongside that. And then you've got the principles of teaching for mastery. Those you'll be used to them. If you've worked with a maths sub, you'll be used to them in terms of the representations, variation, etc., etc. So all those principles should come through. And then finally, the fourth pillar or principle is the achieving mastery. Okay, this idea of what does that look like, what does success look like, and again, so those are the 4 NC10 principles. And then I'm not going to go into this model at all, but many of them would have seen this model. Okay, you can see the small steps, that coherence going through. You've got the mathematical thinking, this idea of fluency, which I know a lot of schools are struggling with, particularly since the school closures, representation and structure, which I'll come on to, and then variation. So those are those. That's those big 5 ideas that the Maths Hub network talk about. So again, if you haven't joined a Maths Hub work group, I would certainly encourage that. So why did we design? So why was Power Maths designed? So it was designed really for these are 4 reasons. There are other reasons, but to try and help teachers teach for mastery, provide some characters to help build that growth mindset, so that help children believe that everybody can succeed. And then purposeful practice, and then these small steps to fit in with the White Rose math schemes. So I know when I go into schools, some people ask me what is the point sometimes of the textbook, what's the purpose of it, and it's a great question, and I always take a bit of time to have a think and give a response to that. So what do you get with it? Why is a textbook scheme like Power Maths really useful? So firstly, it does give you a clear learning progression. So if you're a school and you're looking to develop your maths, then it does give you a progression right from year 1 right through to year 6. Okay, it's ordered sequentially. And if children use a physical textbook, then they can go back. They know their place firstly in that journey, and they can go back and remind themselves of things that they did the last lesson, previous lesson, etc., etc. So there is something to be said in actually the physical textbook. And then they're particularly helpful with teachers who may be novice teachers, who are new to teaching, etc., to give them ideas. And the other thing that you get is that the methods and representations that children see are consistent from year 1 to year 6. I know the schools that I've been in have used occasionally other things just to support things that they're doing. And what I would say is why Power Maths is really good is because you've got that consistent representation right from year 1 to year 6, and everything that's within Power Maths is underpinned by well-grounded theory, and there's a lesson structure which I'm going to lead into now, really. So I now want to just make sure that everybody is clear on the Power Maths lesson structure and why we put that together. So firstly is a power up. Okay, so the power up is this idea to try and it is a bit more of a fluency based activity for students to do. Now, I know, being completely honest with you, that sometimes the power up, sometimes people don't want to do something a bit different because they've looked ahead at the lesson and they think, you know what, actually we're doing today 2-digit plus 2-digit numbers. So what I want to do is I just want to make sure that they know some bonds, and I might use a different power up, or I might just use something that I've used before, a quick activity, and I'm going to do that. So the whole point of the power up is to try and give you a bank of activities that you can use alongside the lesson, but using it flexibly. There might be something that you've done before that you might want to use yourself that just is, you know what, it's going to get them ready to go into an activity. So I was just before lockdown, I delivered a lesson, okay, where we're looking at negative numbers in year 5, and the children I just wanted to make sure children in the group I was working with understood negative numbers. So I did a very, very basic power up on negative numbers. So just something to bear in mind. I'm not going to really talk much about power up, but the more prerequisite stuff that you can put in there to get them ready for the lesson, the better, in my opinion. But there's a whole bank of power up. So moving on to discover. So this is the opening. I took an image from Google for this one. This is just, you've probably seen this Netflix. If you've got Netflix, you've probably seen something like this. And when it loads up, you'll notice that it plays a bit of a section of Netflix, doesn't it? It plays a bit of the film. And there's a reason that it plays a bit of the film, right? And one of the reasons, and you see this not just with Netflix, you see it with other things as well, is the idea is just to generate a bit of curiosity, right? And that is the purpose. That's the purpose of Discover, because what the whole idea around the Discover section is to give you some quite bold, vivid images, okay, that you can bring to life. And I'll talk about how you can bring them to life in a second, right? That you can bring to life that makes children curious, because the theories that we know from cognitive science, that curiosity is what prompts us to learn new ideas and gets us into new things. And so the whole purpose of really the Discover section is really to generate that curiosity, is to give you something to be able to use to bring the maths to life. Okay, so it's that thought, it's that idea, it's that activity, it's something that allows you as a classroom teacher to bring the maths to life. And so where I see Discover done the best is where it's brought to life. It's where teachers tell the story. What's going on in this? What's going on in this image you see? What does it make you think about? Right? These are questions to ask. What could the questions be? Oh, how big are the bars of chocolate, maybe? Right? And then this is what we're going to lead on to. So the whole purpose of the Discover activity is very much to bring the maths to life and generate that curiosity. And so more than anything, that's what you should be trying to do. And this PowerPoint will be shared at the end of this session. So please do feel free to refresh yourselves on the content, but use the Discover task to bring the maths to life, because that's why we designed it. In the teacher guide, it will give some practical examples. So sometimes, for example, there's some activities where the children, the characters are out in the playground, or there's sometimes where I don't know, there might be a shelf in a classroom. Don't be frightened of actually bringing that to life. You know what, instead of using that image today, we're going to go out into the hall. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We try to write as many as possible set in a real life context. Or you might just want to change the context a tiny bit, but just keep the numbers, really. So it's just something to think about. That there is to give a teacher an idea on how they could bring that maths to life. And these are the things that I've just mentioned, really, is that curiosity is what encourages children to explore new ideas. So get them curious, get them thinking, right? Context driven to bring it to life. Lessons organized like a story, okay, because we're more likely to remember stories than anything else. And if we encourage children in this first section to work in pairs rather than individually or small groups, because that cooperative learning. Now, different schools have different cooperative learning strategies, etc., but working together. Now, you'll know there are two questions. And there are two questions because when we did the research into this, some schools wanted an additional thinking question if children couldn't get the first one. So, but I know that I've seen some teachers just focus on the first question, and that's absolutely fine. If you know your class better than anybody else, if you think actually we just want 1A, we're just going to do question 1A today because that's our main focus and I want to get that right, then that's absolutely fine. I know some of the schools I spoke to think they have to do 1A and 1B. That's not necessarily the case. 1B's there depending on because your group might just be a bit further, they're ready for 1B. So that's a classroom, that's a decision that you might want to make as a classroom teacher. So don't feel that it's as rigid as it may sometimes seem, but the overwhelming idea of the first activity is to generate that curiosity. So how you see it best used in a classroom? I see it show the image on screen, but have the textbook on desk so that children can refer to it and go back. Make sure children fully understand the task. Okay, there's nothing worse than when children then have a go at it and then suddenly or you say, right, have a go, and they can't do it. So just make sure they all understand it. Might need to read it to them sometimes, depending on the question. Work together in pairs, and then you just circulate the room. Just have a look around. What are children doing? What are they writing? What are they doing? So that would be my advice really on the Discover section. Is all about an idea to bring the maths to life and to start thinking about, okay, you know what, today we're doing this, finding a fraction of amount. Here's a context to find a fraction of amount, right? Let's explore it. So the second part of this is then the share section, and the share section is full of models and images, right? It's full of models and images as a teacher that you may want to use to bring that children may you may see children use as you're going around. So in the classrooms where I see this used best, the teacher goes around, they look at what the children are doing, and if you've been using it for weeks, months, and then years, ultimately, they'll see these images more and they'll start using them more. And the idea of the share section is to give you lots of representations that bring the maths, that explain what's going on with the maths. So I picked 3 examples here: a bar model to show that addition, repeated addition, multiplication is repeated addition, subtraction is repeated division is repeated subtraction, and then you've got this idea of doubling by the connection between the 2, 4, and the 8 times tables. Really, but Power Maths share section is full of those models and images which you can use. Now, I know one of the things that sometimes people say to me is that there's too many from my group. There's too many. And one of the things that we had to do to hit the NCTM criteria was to make sure that there was a variety of models and representations. And so, which is what we provided. However, in some cases, maybe you just want to focus on the bar model, or you know what, instead of doing 4 methods, we just want to focus on a single method. And again, I want to stress to you, that's absolutely fine. You as a teacher are in control. You know your group, and you know what, actually this lesson, we're going to do this. We're going to focus on part A, and we're going to focus on this specific method that we're all going to make sure they do. And so the share section provides you with ideas on how to explain the content that they may have just done. So that's the purpose of share. So here is the theory behind share. So we gave multiple representations to help children develop their understanding. As I've just said, sometimes if there are too many representations, then it might that could lead to a bit of confusion. So potentially just look at one, okay, depending on where your class are. But I know in some schools, okay, their children are ready to compare this method to this method to this method. Again, it's your group, it's what works for you. The characters have been designed, okay, to highlight misconceptions. There's plenty of use of examples and non-examples, okay, for you to talk around. It shows children that there's not just one way to solve the problem, and through what the character, if you look carefully at what the characters say, they're often demonstrating their thinking. They're not just telling an answer, that they're telling you about what they're thinking about, and thinking is so important to learning, and I'll come on to that in a few minutes. But that's the theory behind it, is to give that sense of understanding, bring meaning to the mathematics as well. So this is where I see it done best. Okay, so in share, children share their ideas, okay, and so the teacher's gone round in the Discover task. They've looked at what children are doing, and you know what, I'm going to take some of those ideas. And I went into one classroom once, and every child had a bit of an avatar, and this child came forward, and that was their method, and then this child came forward, and that was their method, and that were brilliant. Okay, so and then they compared it to what they were in the book. Okay, okay, have you done the same method as Flo? Have you done this, etc., etc.? So it is about the teacher taking the ideas once the children have had a go, and to see how they've done. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, what happens if they don't have that necessary background knowledge really to be able to cope, say, with the Discover task? And that's where maybe you've got to think about the Power Up and what you do in Power Up, okay, to make sure maybe they've got that bit of prerequisite knowledge. And if not, it might have to just be a bit more guided for this lesson. Really, every lesson's not the same, okay? Just because it might be a bit more guided in this lesson, it doesn't mean it's guided in the next lesson. And then the only other bullet point I want to mention on this slide is it's vital that as a teacher, make the link between the concrete, pictorial, and abstract parts of the share, right? Where I see Power Maths not used the most effectively is when there's just a nod given to the image and representation. It's vital as a teacher you make that link between anything concrete to then the pictorial and then the abstract part. So just something to bear in mind. So we then move, and I know I'm going through this quite rapidly, but again, you would be welcome to rewatch this at the end when you get sent the link. So the next section I want to look at is Think Together. We deliberately called this section Think Together because we know how important thinking is to children's learning, right? Many of you will have seen this quote from Daniel Willingham, is that our memories that are in our heads are made up of residue of our thoughts, okay? They are the residue of what we think about. What we think about carefully is what we will remember. And so the whole point of the share section in a way is to help bring the meaning to life, and the Think Together section is to get children to think carefully about the mathematics. Now, what we've provided in the Think Together section is, you've seen we provide often 3 or sometimes 4 questions that you may want to use that takes the thinking on from the activity that you've just done in the share section, sorry, in the Discover and Share section. Now, we know, and what we've tried to do with that is we've tried to scaffold it. So the first question, there's a lot of scaffolding. The second question, there's less scaffolding. And the third question is a bit more of a challenge. Josh will pick up on this later, because I know it's been a question from some of you, but we know that for some schools, right, that there's not enough questions there, that you need some more questions. And so occasionally, particularly around question 2, you might need to supplement it if your class are not ready, say, for the challenge, or you don't want to do the challenge, etc., etc. So again, my colleague Josh will pick up on that in a few minutes, but it might be something you might need to have a think about that Think Together. But again, you know your class, so when you're looking ahead at what today's lesson is going to be like, you can look ahead at it, and you can say, really, you know what, I know I'm going to need to put another column addition in here because they haven't got it yet, and I'm going to do it. Then I'm going to do another column addition, but I'm just going to be ready for that. But I know in some cases, you might actually, you know what, they've already got this. I'm going to move on to the challenge straight away, depending, and it all depends on your group, because every group's a different point and different starting points. So we've designed it so we refer to those in the background as micro steps. So we take in so we've got a small step and then we've got some micro steps within that, and it's designed to encourage the thinking. So things that I would say in this one is that in the practice, the practice of think together is that you don't be doing the thinking for the children, right? We sometimes we promote this I do, we do, you do model, which is fine, and you might want to use it like that. And there are notes in the one of the blogs that Simon mentioned in a bit more detail about that. However, you don't necessarily have to use it like that, right? But the key thing I would say is that if children are not doing the thinking, then they're not learning, right? And you might want to think about really making sure that you're not over elaborating something, you're not doing all the thinking for the children, particularly in the latter questions. We also know occasionally that sometimes, particularly if you want to use a slightly different method, or maybe, you know what, some of the boxes sometimes are leading to cognitive overload. Don't worry about the boxes, right? Don't worry about what number has to go into what box, okay? Just focus on answering the question and what those questions look like, because we know in some cases, sometimes the boxes can confuse the children, okay, depending on the method that's being used, particularly if it's the first time they've used that method. Then, you know what, just focus on the question, right? So in others, right, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to multiply 17 by 2, because that's what we've got 2 lots of 17, and that's what we're going to do. And then the only other comment I would make is that if you know what, if she just wants to get the fluency stuff and just get the basics, then consider doing a challenge later. Revisit a different lesson later on in the year, okay, another time in the day if you've got that opportunity. I think it's really important that you build a child's confidence before you necessarily do the challenge if they're struggling with it. So I just want to, because that's the last part of the pupil book, okay, the textbook itself. And to sum up the textbook, I would say that it is a useful set of ideas that for teachers to be able to use at different to give them ideas on how, and a structure around how to teach it. Generate that curiosity, share the ideas that the children have got, use models or representations, and then do some micro steps and small steps to build that understanding and secure that understanding. And I feel that there is that Power Maths is rich with ideas that you can use. One that comes to my head is the division, is the lollipop sticks with division. If you've never seen that lesson, I think it's year 3, where you look at division and remainder, etc. That is a great idea to help children understand why, for example, if they're making squares and they've got 13 matchsticks, so imagine 13 lollipop sticks and you can make 3 squares and you've got 1 remainder. It really gets them to understand what remainder is and why there can never be a remainder 4 or greater when you're dividing by 4, because you know what, if not, because you make another square. It's full of rich examples and rich activities for you to use, okay, in the book. So that was the purpose of Power Maths as pupil book, to give you as a teacher ideas and children to be able to generate that curiosity and interest, really. So I'm going to move on briefly to the practice section, because I know Josh is going to pick up on some things on the practice section. Those are just a few images from the practice section. Now, the practice book is designed for more independent practice, okay? It's designed to try and help children have a go at the things that they've just learned. What's vital when you do this is that children are ready for this independent practice, okay? And sometimes in some schools, I've seen some children who just then fly through this straight away, which is great, but some children in that group might just need a bit more support. So the teachers give them just a couple, you know what, I'm actually going to work, or the TAs work with them, have done some, and they've just worked through that together. So although we call it independent practice, for some children in your group, you might need to build up to that independence. So don't worry if you're finding that sometimes. And again, I go back to this point where sometimes if you don't follow the exact method, then sometimes the boxes can be a bit confusing. And the higher up the year groups we go, we've removed the boxes and a structure a bit more. But that's where you might want to consider just making sure that the method that you use matches the one in textbook. And if you're trying to do that and it's still not working, then maybe if there is space around it, they don't overly worry about filling in the boxes. But again, my colleague Josh will talk more about that in a few minutes, really. So reflect section is just then a final. I think this is one of those sections that people either use or they don't use. Okay, some people I know use it all the time, some people don't use it at all, and they don't really see the purpose of it. The reflect section is probably one of my favorite sections, and it's just designed as a question to help you as a teacher work out what the children have learned or understood in this lesson. What have they taken away from this lesson? Because what you hope the takeaway is not always what the takeaway. So we've designed the reflect question as much as possible, given the vast number of authors that we had, okay, right, to try and help just provide that reflection on learning for you as a teacher. So that's the purpose of reflect. So just want to spend the last 5 minutes of my time very quickly going through some implementation advice, really. So these are things in the context of learning loss that you might want to just have a tiny bit of a think about. So like anything like this, teachers need to prepare and plan the questions, plan the key points, plan for where your group might struggle, right? And so that's vital. I'm not saying it has to be extensive planning. Okay, the ideas have been generated for you, etc., etc. Just make the key thing for me is just make sure you know what's coming up and you know your group, and you know what, actually these things are here, and I need to just be ready for that, because my children might not be ready for that. Accept also that change takes time. I know I go into schools at the start of a year sometimes, often before COVID, when it started schools, and at the start of the year, they're saying, oh, I can't get it, it's not working, it's not going right, etc. Can you give us a hand with this? And then you do your best. And by the end of the year, they get it, they love it, they think it's brilliant. And that, you know, because that change does take time. And you know what, one of the things you might want to do is just get one of the sections right. You know what, I'm just going to focus a bit more on discover and make sure I'm bringing that to life. And then I'm going to focus on the share section and make sure I'm covering. So you might want to just focus on just get one of the sections right. Like I said right at the very start, some schools have had a real broken journey with Power Maths because you've started it. You've tried to get it right, and there's so many other things going on, children, and so it might not have been possible. So maybe actually the focus might be, let's just get one section right at this moment in time, and let's focus on that. So I said this already, but make sure teachers explicitly link the concrete to the pictorial to the abstract. I think that's a key message throughout, and where I see children understand it the most is where teachers make that link between 3 counters, a bar model, say, or something, and then the number 3, right? Whatever happens to be. They make that link absolutely explicit and clear. So that's something that I would say with this. And then you also might want to consider doing some pre-teaching for those children in your group who might have missed this last year, or you might want to consider doing a bit of pre-teaching. Right. So the other thing I would say, just to bear in mind, just in case you weren't aware, is that one of the things that we decided to do in Power Maths is we decided to also cover the non-statutory guidance in the curriculum. So there are bits in every single textbook, right, that you don't have, the lessons that you don't, and I think there is a document somewhere where we've highlighted those, really. So because they are non-stat guidance, we decided to do it because teachers were saying some schools cover the non-stat guidance, and so they wanted us to cover the non-statutory guidance in national. So if you take, for example, fractions in year 2, that fractions goes well beyond the statutory guidance in year 2. So you know what, my students can't cross the 10. I need to focus a bit more time on just crossing the 10 and adding within 20. Then then take that time to do that and then gain it back from the fractions lessons, right? So just have a look and just make sure, because there is a lot of non-stat guidance, not a lot, but I'd say around 10% of lessons cover the non-stat guidance. So something for you just to be aware of, really. Because I know when I've gone around schools, not many schools have known that. So I just want to flag that up. So reading level we know can be difficult in place for some children, okay, particularly the challenge questions. So maybe consider doing the reasoning together. Make sure you read the question to children. And in one of the schools I visited, one of the teachers was saying, well, they're really struggling to read these words, etc., etc. But unfortunately, the words that they were trying to read were mathematical words, and there's nothing much we could do about that. And so, in other words, you might want to say focus on like the word calculate. Just take a small separate focus on key words that keep coming up that maybe children don't understand or don't get, really. And I know particularly in Key Stage 1, and we did make some adaptations to Year 1, for example. We revised the Year 1 practice book, okay, to try and make it a bit more fluency based. So because we know that maybe that was a bit word heavy, but just something to bear in mind. And then I hope this has come throughout, is don't be frightened to encourage teachers, you guys, if you're a leader, sorry, to encourage your teachers to use the books flexibly, right? You know your group better than anybody else. Don't please see it as rigid, that you have to do this. If that message has come across, I apologize. It is very much for you to be able to use flexibly. It gives you a structure to follow, but use it flexibly is what I would encourage. So this is my advice on possible way forward. And this is my last slide that I'm going to do. So ensure any starter provides that prerequisite knowledge for the lesson. Because you've got this context of learning loss, the power up might not be the perfect starter, or for that lesson, there might be another power up that's good. Or you know what, we might just need to just do this really quickly. Bonds to 10 and we're going to do this, etc., etc. Right? Look at the Discover and Share sections for suggested models and representations and ideas for activities. Use that section, right, as a teacher to give you ideas. Okay, you know what, I'm going to do this model, this representation, okay, etc. Right, and then Think Together sections provide some ideas of questions to ask children. And then you might want to potentially mix of practice if the practice books is too hard initially and they need more fluency. So Josh is going to talk about this more in a second, but you might want to put a few more questions into Think Together, right? So actually I need a bit more, right? And then consider more fluency practice. And again, I'm not going to steal Josh's thunder, I promise, Josh, because I know you're going to come on to it. And final message, again, repeat what I said, is be flexible, because your group, you know your group better than anybody else, right? So be flexible. It's what's right for your group. Before I hand over to Josh, the final thing I just want to say is really that Josh and I are always here if you want any support, okay, through Pearson, okay, more than welcome. We just talking to schools, helping teachers out. Those are things occasionally we can do, okay, if we want some support. So do get in touch and do share your stories. And we do follow the Facebook groups and other things like this. So thank you everybody for your feedback. I hope that was really useful. I'm gonna, hopefully that transitions nicely into Josh. And I think there's already some pre-questions, Josh, which you're going to take, and then I don't know if any others have come up in chat, but any that we don't answer in chat, my understanding is that we will then send it like an answer sheet out with some thoughts on that as well. So Josh, I believe it's over to you. Is that right?
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for that. Very interesting to hear and to see. And thanks to everyone who'd sent in questions beforehand. And there have been some coming up today. I saw a suggestion come up in the chat, which, although purely practical and day-to-day, about can we have a space to write the date in the workbooks, that made me just chuckle with delight and think that is actually a very useful, that would be a very useful suggestion for the future. So I'm just nudging that towards Simon to think it's important to remember how schools are using these. And then we had another one about having boxes for the children to write in their answers. And I think that if it's possible, we could see how we can manage that in the future. So thank you. I'm going to try and, I can't answer all of the questions that were sent through, but what I'm going to try and do is answer them by clumping them together into various sort of groups. There are some that I can think about and answer in a relatively quick way. So there's an interesting one that came through about, can power maths be used as an intervention? I'm assuming rather than just a whole class scheme or something like that. And I think that that's an interesting, certainly wasn't designed like that, but I did speak to a head teacher after the first lockdown who'd said that it had been really quite a powerful thing for them to be able to send the books home as part of home learning and as part of lockdown learning. And that what they found is that the parents who engaged with the children with it found it a really useful intervention. And because they were in this one-to-one situation often, they did find that it fit that bill really, really well. So I'm assuming that it could possibly be used like that. I've never tried it. It certainly wasn't designed like that, but there's no reason why it couldn't be. I think Tony's covered the questions about coverage and people saying, given the lost learning situation and the fact that there's a lot of gaps from previous year groups, saying we're seeming to be falling further behind. Tony mentioned about the difference between statutory and non-statutory. To suggest that places you can look to make some informed decisions about which bits you might want to cover in detail and which bits you might want to whiz smoothly through, or even think to yourself, well, I'll cover that later if there's time. There's the ready to progress guidance that came out from the DFE during lockdown. That might be a useful place to look to make some of those decisions, so that you can think about that. And the national curriculum itself is organized pretty clearly into, you've got statutory bullet points and non-statutory bullet points, and so that's quite a useful, it's PDF, you can find it, and that's quite a useful place to be able to look. In the defense of the non-statutory lessons, I would say that sometimes in the national curriculum what's in the non-statutory guidance is actually more interesting, and so that's why we wanted to include some of it, because you can see there's some real meat in there. Right, I'm going to just go through. I've got a very interesting question here about how to moderate pupil workbooks. I don't know if this is something that you mean just in your class to get a sense of how things are going, or say between schools and a MAT. I think that would be just cold if you had a book from a year 3 class in this school and a book from a year 3 class in that school. I personally think I would find that very difficult to moderate, because I wouldn't be sure how much had gone into the teaching, how different the teaching was, whether they'd done the teacher models, the child does the question, the teacher models, the child, and so on and so on. What I would say is that they are a really useful record for being able to make some sort of moderation. So let's say you're a maths leader and you're going into a class, then it would be quite a useful record to be able to go back through and say to a child, oh, I saw you put this answer here for question, in this lesson you did last week. I wonder what that means. And because often when we've tried to do moderation in the past and the work has just been in an exercise, sort of in a squared exercise book without all of the information present there, that conversation sometimes falls apart. But actually being able to interact with the child and have all of that information there, I think that would be how I would see using it for getting a sense of how well the work in the book represents what the pupil has understood as they go through to next week. I often say to teachers, actually, it's not important that they get the answer right today. It's important that they're able to answer questions like this tomorrow and in a week. So getting teachers to think about, well, it doesn't matter as much what goes in this box now, but what matters is, are they able to explain to you tomorrow or the day after or the week after why they made certain decisions, or what different decisions would they make right now? I'm just going to quickly see if there are any others. I've got a specific question here. Children are struggling with subtraction within 20, so how will they manage to 50? I'm in year 1. Felt like there was I could feel some exasperation in that question. I think that's a good example of one of the situations where, looking at the ready to progress document, it's clear that there's some suggestions that really we want pupils to build those core number facts. So if it's learning how to subtract within 10, that's the thing I want to be able to focus on. And then if there are questions that come up in later lessons about subtraction within 50 in year 1, I'd be thinking to myself, do you know what, I'm going to zero in back on those subtraction methods within 10. So something like that. you can make those decisions based on what you know is going to be right for the class. And then,
Josh, can I just make a point on that one? Is that all right?
no, I'm in mid-flow, and pearls of wisdom are about to,
Yeah.
yes, of course, Tony.
So I think that's a great question. And I think that's where I think it is, as Josh said, it's about making a sensible decision for your group. Because I know there'll be some schools that will say to us, oh, our children, because whether that's in non-stat guidance or whether it goes a bit further, there'll be some schools who say actually their children are ready for that and those children want that, and so therefore trying to provide for both schools is a difficult task, as you can. So actually, if what's important, if a decision that you make as a school that actually for children in this year group, we just want to stay within 20, then that's then I think that's a decision that you make, and that's the right decision. And regardless of whether, it doesn't mean that you have to throw away everything in power maths. It just means maybe, you know what, we're just going to spend more time doing some practice on that method at that time. So that's my point about the flexible usage of it. Don't be frightened of it, really. And that's the confidence we want to try and give you today. To don't feel that you have to be. It's about your class and your school and your context. Sorry, Josh.
Don't apologize at all. Thank you, Tony. That's really useful. And then I'm going to group lots of the rest of the questions around this idea of what I've ended up with is this wide range of attainment or confidence or skills or knowledge, or the differentiation question. And what a lot of the questions are coming through is that even before lockdown, I had a wide differentiation within my class, and now necessarily that's become wider, and also it may be that because of learning loss, it's really stretched towards one end. So I'm going to try and think about some advice around those issues, and try and approach it with some mindset questions from the teacher's point of view, so that rather than have just one silver bullet, this is the way to work, rather let's have a way of thinking that might help teachers make decisions when it comes to solving some of these challenges. And I'd say these challenges are basically universal. Every single class has a range of confidence and range of speed that children work at. You'll have some children who are number crunchers and really whiz through some of that number work. Other children who need more practice at that. Other children, anyway, you all all get the idea. My number one hint would be that when every single lesson was written, basically I've tried different phrases with teachers. We've talked about maybe a golden nugget, like a core or the heart of the lesson. Like, so it could be there's a golden nugget right at the heart of the lesson. I've even tried one group that I worked with, they settled on the idea of that there was a baby bird, and that the child at the end of the lesson, the child would be cradling this baby bird that's just hatched and take it out to show their parents at the end of the day. So another way of framing it is to suggest that when the parents pick up the pupil on the playground, they say, "What did you do today?" Now, we all know that in real terms, the answer is dunno, or not much, or can't remember. However, let's have this miracle idea of that they actually answer. And what we would want them to answer would be that core, that heartbeat of the lesson, that time here, this baby burden. So it might be, oh, sometimes when I'm adding 3-digit numbers, I can just add the ones, for example. That's the heartbeat of one lesson I remember very clearly from in year 3. And so as a teacher, I think the very first thing to do is to look through the lesson and have it absolutely clear on my mind, here's what the heartbeat of this lesson is. And if I could say it in just one sentence, or just a brief phrase that gets to the core of what's going on in this lesson. Once as a teacher, I've got to grips with that, then all the decisions I make fall out of that, basically. And so looking through any lesson, if I can make that decision, what's this baby bird that I want the people to walk through the door and nurture at the end of this lesson? Now, it's a slightly melodramatic way of putting it. However, I think it's what's there. Once you've decided that, then you can start to make decisions. Decisions, for example, such as, well, if that's the tiny bit of learning I want them to do today, what is it that's going to block some children learning it? I would guess that more often than not, it's some basic number fluency work that's going to get in the way of them being able to understand or get to grips with what you want them to learn in that lesson. And so then as a teacher, my advice would be to go through and pick out some of the fluency that's going to be necessary, and then to drop that in and decide, okay, either I could pre-teach to that. So there's questions around, what about these children who are really struggling and are a year or maybe more behind? How can I get them to access some of the learning? And I've got one idea. I'm going to try and share some ideas I had around this, if I can, in a moment. Right, yes. So I'll just see if I can share my screen. So hopefully you should now be able to see a screen that says fluency. And I'm just going to go through this. So here's me looking at a lesson, and I think this is the year 3 lesson, where basically, if it's add or subtract ones, then the idea would be that what the pupils need to, the baby bird that the pupils need to cradle to leave the lesson is, oh, I can work this out using my number bonds. Now, there's question 1 here. At 12 o'clock, there are 319 people in the museum, then 7 left. How many people are now in the museum? So I'm thinking to myself, right, do I want my pupils to spend the time thinking, oh, 9 take away 7, I don't know what that is? And then do I want their thinking to be around, oh, I've got to do one of these things that I can't do very well? Or do I want their thinking to be around, can I find the number fact that's going to help me answer this here? So what I've done for this lesson, and I've assumed that the way that my class in this hypothetical situation learn their number bonds to 9 is by looking at these part whole models. And I've just displayed them. They could be around the room. They could be, I could have hidden them in different parts of the room. And my job would be, right, look around the room and find the number bond that's going to help you answer this question, and try and think about that. And then we've got this other question here, question 2. I've done something similar with this one, right? Okay, I've tried, this is a bit harder here because is it an add, is it subtract, what's the whole, and so on and so on. So they're having to do a slight bit more of thinking into select the correct number fact. So if I'm the teacher or I'm supporting teacher to make these decisions, I think first I've gone through and decided what is that beating heart of the lesson. The second thing is, right, what are the number facts that I want them to be able to select from in order to be able to answer some of these questions, if it's a situation where that's the thinking I'd rather than being able to do with some sort of sense of automaticity. No, sorry, I'm going to go back to there. And then if I were to, I've taken the same bit from the same lesson, but if I wanted to give it a little bit more of them, give them a bit more space to do some thinking, I could have some of the bits hidden from it. I might cover them in post-it notes and so on and so on. But gradually, as I go through as a teacher, I'd probably want to engage them with being able to make these decisions and be able to just draw on some of those key facts. And I think that that also enables the teacher to have a clearer sense of where they're going to go with the lesson. So in terms of working flexibly, it would be about deciding the relationship between how much number churning do I want them to do, or how many number decisions do I want them to make in this lesson. And if the teacher's clear on that, then I think that some of the other decisions about differentiation come through from there.
Josh?
Yes.
Just to add as well. So this is a great example of what I'm talking about. Really, this is context driven. It's a story. So this very much relies on you. The success of this relies on the teacher setting the scene in the discover and share task. So if that's not set appropriately, then actually this question might be a bit more difficult for children because they haven't got the context. They're not feeling the context. It's just somebody reading something. So if they're not in the context, then they might struggle. So what you might, if they're not in it, you might want to consider just stripping that story away, really, because like Josh said, if you're trying to nurture this key thing about if you're adding or subtracting, you can just look at the ones, okay? Then because I don't think we were crossing any 10 there, or we were going across 10, then you might want to consider, you know what, we're just going to do 319 take 7. We're just going to make 319 as a group, and we're just going to take 7 away, and we're going to record, because actually to understand that, it's vital that you got the discover and share. Now I'm conscious we'll probably hit time, aren't we, Simon? Really, I think, are we? Yeah. I've just got one more. Okay.
Is that all right? So yeah. just to go through this, I'm just sort of putting this together. I'm going to just share the next stage around questions about how do I develop the fluency and give more questions. So I'm just looking at this sequence of learning going from, so let's say I've done this bit of learning with the class, And Tony mentioned before that Think Together 2 is often a good place to stop and do some more fluency work with the class. And so what I've done, from thinking about these number bonds I wanted them to work with, I've then very simply come up with a range of related questions, you might call it variation, just calculations where I want them to have some fluency practice. I've not given myself any more work because I've made the decision to stick with some of these same number bonds. But what I have done is given the pupils more time to pause and think and develop the confidence using that as fluency. And then finally, there's this question about what do I do with, let's say, greater depth. Some people are calling them higher achievers, or basically the children that have crunched through some of the work quicker than others. Likewise here, so here's the start of this lesson. I've looked back to the start of this lesson and thought to myself, well, actually I'm looking at 1A and then 1B, and 1B here is that some have gone in and then some have come out. And I think, well, that's often hidden in the discover task is something quite interesting as a way of just generating some more thinking. This idea of some go in, some come out, some go in, some go out, some go in. And then I just had a bit of fun for a certain value of what the word means, with that idea of here are some calculations that represent that. 4 go in, 1 comes out. 4 go in, 3 come out. 3 go in, 4 come out. 4 go in, 5 come out. 4 go in, some come out. This is what I've got left with. And then started to be almost, so I've heard someone call these maths jokes, where they're not, they're not silly, but they are just there to pique that curiosity in a way. And I've just had some fun with making up some different calculations. And then I think once you've got a sequence of calculations like this, what I've done as a teacher is look at the lesson, understood the core of what I want to get from it, and then made some of these decisions about how to make the calculations interesting or fun for the pupils to work with. That's just one way that you might want to do that. Sorry if I didn't have time to answer all of the different questions.
Thanks, Josh. That looked like fun to me. Yeah, we said it would be an hour, although I forgot to say that right at the beginning. But so we're just coming up to time. But before you go, we're going to be running a short survey in the next couple of weeks just to get feedback on Power Maths and explore any ways that we can improve the service. So if you'd be happy to receive an email about that, just with a link to the survey, then we're just going to put up a quick poll or survey for you now in the Zoom session, so you can just tick that if you want to. Thank you. So hopefully you feel like your questions that you submitted beforehand have been covered by the blogs and by what Josh has covered just now. If there's anything that you didn't think was covered, you can put it in the Q&A and we can give that a look. I just want to mention that if you are a school that's new to Power Maths and you've been part of this session, just getting a feel for it, get in an appointment with a partnership manager at Pearson for an overview of Power Maths that will help put all of this into context. So that's more or less it. Before we finish, I just want to congratulate the winner of our primary maths crossword competition, which is Trawden Forest Primary School. So you'll get an email from us so you can claim your prize. Well done. And thanks to everybody who took part. And I hope you had good fun with that. I think rather than kind of look back, I think I can always look back at the chat and the Q&A afterwards, just in case there's anything that we've missed, rather than kind of look for that now. So let's finish there. I do just want to say a big thank you to Tony and Josh for their time this afternoon. Thanks to all of you for attending, and close the session when you're ready to. Hope you have a nice evening. Thank you very much.